Let's bring in Sean Kennedy. I'm happy he's here with us on the program today. He's Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at the National Restaurant Association. Sean, I'm looking at a letter that you sent to the White House that you say as sales will decline by $225 billion during the next 3 months, a loss of between 7 and 5 million jobs, and a note that's dated today. So tell me, how are the conversations going?
The conversations are going well, but just keep in mind that we are in the perfect storm right now for the restaurant industry. You have a combination of declining sales based on fewer people coming into the restaurants. You combine that with 41 states and local governments have mandated restrictions on how we can operate our businesses. And you're doing that to an industry that has very tight cash flow and very few cash margins right now. So we're responding the best way we can to stay open, but it's going to require a lot of closures across the board otherwise.
Tell me how you get to the number, because while conceptually it's obviously very clear that this is going to be painful, how do you quantify it? Sean, walk me through how you guys get to the loss numbers, how you get to the sales numbers.
Well, we're reaching a point where our revenues are down about 70%. So even if, as there are governments, they're still allowing takeout traffic, drive-through, carry-away, things like that, that's not going to always be enough for some restaurants to find a way to stay open, to keep their payroll going and to pay their fixed costs. So a lot of restaurants are simply going to have to shut down altogether. Our biggest concern is, as we shut down, will we be able to pick up? Will we be able to resume once COVID is behind us and it's business as usual? We've asked for $145 billion in a package to allow for immediate access to cash, short and medium term access to loans, and tax credits that could keep the industry sustained so we can continue serving these communities.
What do you see already in terms of layoffs? Is this already happening? Is it layoffs instead of furloughs, or stay at home and we'll get back to you? What's the breakdown in terms of temp workers now whose temporary nature has been ended, as opposed to those who do have some degree of contract or some degree of long-term clarity?
We're trying right now to minimize this as much as possible. But if you're in a situation where you've simply got no revenue, a lot of restaurants are finding it easier and more practical to simply close their doors and lay off their workers. What we're asking for from the government are the funds to allow us to keep those workers, keep them on the payroll, so that when things come back online, we can get the burners up, the doors unlocked and open, and serve people as quickly as possible. The reaction from the White House and Congress so far has been incredibly encouraging. They've been reaching out to us.
Really?
They know the importance of this industry. We think they're going to get the balance right. The question for us is just going to be, is it going to be too little, too late?
What is the timeline for the too late part of that? It seems like you've laid out the numbers for what you think makes sense. On the timeline, is there a certain point where you cross a threshold and, hey, even if you do get help, guess what? The folks have already been laid off. Doors have already been closed.
Well, the Senate just today is passing phase 2 of the COVID response, which is focused on how do we ensure that the workforce has access to paid sick leave. We're trying to get ahead of Congress on that one right now with our requests and just say, let's make sure that we even have the ability that doors will be open if workers need to call in sick. If that doesn't happen, the whole thing is going to fall apart. From a timeline perspective, it's getting harder every day. As you can expect, initially it was just a drop off in banquets, large-scale dinners, things like that. Our lunch and dinner traffic was still unchanged. The bottom really fell out over Friday, and it continues to deteriorate from here.
What about the offset from those who are able to do delivery? I guess that question lies in a few parts, one of which is how many restaurants are capable of just turning into delivery overnight? Obviously, this has been a big trend over the last several years, but I imagine many still have not adopted that. The second one is, economically, what percent of the revenues can they save if, let's say, they're able to do online already? Any idea what percent of that top line cash flow will be able to hold up if they move to an all delivery method or pickup?
Every restaurant right now is looking at that and saying, how can we change our business model overnight to do it? Some restaurants just simply aren't physically equipped to evolve into nothing but a kitchen and someone allowing a third-party delivery company to come in. If restaurants can do it, they are. But for many, it's not going to be enough. And then when you sort of add to that, it still is going to require the furlough of workers because we're not going to need servers in those instances. And finally, we are really concerned that that volume of traffic, that volume of business is not going to be enough to equate to a packed restaurant at a lunchtime or dinner time hour. That is where these restaurants make their money. That's how they're able to pay their operating expenses.
Right now, we've seen varying degrees of shutdowns around the country. Are there obvious places that need this money first? Are there franchises or companies that your group works directly with that you know are in pain?
The National Restaurant Association really represents everybody, from the large, well-known chain to the smaller corner diner or small bistro. We have everything in between, and they all are seeing sales ending in ways that they hadn't before. So it doesn't matter if you're Let Us Entertain You or a small corner diner, they all are looking at really life or death situations right now, which is why action from Congress is absolutely so critical at this point.
On average, I know that, well, I think that most people are familiar with the difficulty of running a restaurant, the thin margins, the difficulty of, sticking with trends, being in front, all that stuff. I spent my high school days working at an Outback, so I've seen a little bit of it firsthand. The question, Sean, is on average, how much of these companies, how much kind of wiggle room do they have? I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying, we're talking like maybe days or weeks. At what point do the bills start to pile up and they have to either foreclose on those areas, on the actual storefronts? Weeks, days, months?
It really depends on what kind of business you're talking to. Obviously, your Outback, Bloomin' Brands, they might have a slightly longer lease on life, but they too are looking at making really tough decisions for their larger chains. If you're a smaller one, you are measuring your cash flow in days, maybe weeks, definitely not months. So for everybody right now, this is so different from a traditional natural disaster. If a hurricane or a tornado passes through a community, it's in an isolated place for a fixed amount of time, and we know exactly when we can rebuild. This is a nationwide pandemic that is effectively shuttering the second largest private sector employer, America's restaurants, and we don't know when it's going to end. Yeah. It's that uncertainty that's really driving a lot of concerns and a lot of CFOs across the country to make tough decisions as to how long they can operate under this kind of scenario.
One more for you, Sean. On the supply side, I know what we're talking about is demand as customers don't come through, but were there any disruptions earlier on, or are there expected to be disruptions for food or any other items, goods, supply chain problems? Is that now just so secondary to the demand issue, or is that still something that is a problem?
It is something we're certainly keeping an eye on. Again, if the demand isn't there, it doesn't matter how many supply inputs we have. We're keeping close ties on how rail capacity is going. We are talking with our providers. We feel good overall that if we can stay open, we are still going to have access to the foodstuffs and the goods that we need to provide to serve our customers. The bigger question is, are we going to be able just to pay the lights and pay our employees?
Okay. Sean Kennedy, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs at the National Restaurant Association. Appreciate the insight. Best of luck in your fight. Hopefully, I think everybody is rooting for you. There's obviously nothing a restaurant owner can do about what's happening right now. Appreciate it, Mr. Kennedy. Looking forward to continuing the conversation. And for those watching,
order some carryout tonight. Thanks for having me.
I've been ahead of that trend for a while. I'm going to up it now. Appreciate it, Sean. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Kennedy. And for those watching, National Restaurant Association on the website /COVID-19 does have more information. So go check it out.